I, 28F, stood by the polished casket, the scent of lilies and old wood filling the air. My grandmother, Rose, had been the anchor of our family. Seeing her still and silent was a shock that hadn't quite settled in my bones. My mother, Eleanor, stood beside me, a pillar of perfect grief. She wore a tailored black dress, her face a mask of composed sorrow. She greeted mourners with a quiet dignity that I always admired and secretly resented. Our family was built on appearances, and my mother was its chief architect. The funeral service was a blur of soft weeping and fond remembrances. The minister spoke of Grandma Rose's kindness, her love for her garden, and her unwavering faith. My mother had carefully curated the eulogies, ensuring every word painted the picture of a simple, happy life. A life with one daughter, Eleanor, and one granddaughter, me. It was a neat, tidy story, like everything else in my mother's world. As the final prayer ended and people began to file out, a woman I had never seen before stepped through the heavy oak doors of the chapel. She was not dressed for a funeral. She wore a simple floral dress, the kind my grandmother might have worn on a summer day. Her hair was graying at the temples, and her face held a striking resemblance to the faded photographs of a young Grandma Rose. The room grew quiet as she walked slowly, deliberately, down the center aisle. She didn't look at anyone but the casket. My father, Mark, moved to intercept her, his expression a mixture of confusion and polite concern. He was always the family's gentle gatekeeper, smoothing over any potential awkwardness. "Can I help you?" he asked in a low voice. "The service is over." The woman stopped and finally looked away from the casket. Her eyes, the same soft blue as my grandmother's, scanned the front row. They landed on my mother. "I'm not here for the service," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying through the hushed room. "I'm here for her." Then she looked directly at my mother, her expression unreadable. "I'm her first daughter." The words hung in the air, sharp and impossible. A collective gasp rippled through the remaining guests. My Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister, clutched her husband's arm. My father froze, his hand still outstretched. But my eyes were locked on my mother. The mask of perfect sorrow didn't just crack, it shattered. All the color drained from her face. She turned a ghostly, horrifying pale. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a single, terrifying second, I thought she was going to be sick right there on the plush red carpet. In that moment, I knew. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core. The stranger was telling the truth. And my mother's entire life, and by extension my own, was a carefully constructed lie. This woman, this stranger, was my aunt. And my mother had hidden her from the world. The ride home from the funeral home was suffocatingly silent. My father drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. My mother sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the gray passing scenery. She had not said a word since the woman, who had quietly introduced herself to the bewildered funeral director as Clara, had been escorted into a private waiting room. My mother had refused to see her. She had simply grabbed my arm and my father's, and with her head held high, marched us out of the chapel as if fleeing a fire. The whispers of our relatives followed us out the door. I sat in the back, the silence pressing in on me. I wanted to scream, to ask the million questions that were ricocheting around my skull. Who was Clara? Why had we never known about her? What did my mother know? The answer to the last question was obvious. She knew everything. The sheer, primal terror on her face had been more than shock. It had been the look of someone whose deepest, darkest secret had just been laid bare in front of the entire world. When we arrived at my parents' immaculate house, my mother swept inside without a word and went straight to her bedroom, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. My father sighed, a heavy, weary sound, and loosened his tie. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly. I followed him. I couldn't stand the silence any longer. "Dad?" I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Who is that woman?" He took a long drink of water before answering. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know, Olivia," he said. "Some crank, I imagine. People do strange things for attention or money." His denial was weak, and he knew it. It was the standard response, the one my mother had probably already telepathically communicated to him. The family script for dealing with anything unpleasant was always the same: deny, dismiss, and pretend it never happened. "Dad, look at me," I insisted. "You saw Mom's face. That was not the face of someone seeing a stranger. That was something else." She was terrified. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pain I couldn't quite decipher. "Your mother is grieving, Olivia. Her mother just died. She's vulnerable. Someone took advantage of that." "Took advantage by claiming to be her sister?" I pressed, my voice rising. Why would anyone do that? And why did she look so much like Grandma Rose? "Coincidence," he said, the word sounding hollow and absurd even to him. "Please, just let it go. For your mother's sake. Today has been hard enough." He was shutting me down, just as she would have. They were a united front, the guardians of a secret I was now desperate to understand. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. "I can't just let it go," I said, my voice shaking. "This is our family, my grandmother. Don't I have a right to know the truth?" My father's face hardened. "The truth is that your grandmother was a wonderful woman who loved you and your mother very much. The truth is that your mother just lost her and is in a great deal of pain. Everything else is just noise. Now, I'm going to check on her." He left the kitchen, leaving me alone with the ringing silence and the bitter taste of his dismissal. He wasn't just protecting my mother. He was choosing her version of reality over the one I had seen with my own eyes. I stood there for a long time, staring at the perfect sterile kitchen, a room where no secret had ever been allowed to breathe. I thought about the woman, Clara. I thought about the strength in her voice. And I thought about the look on my mother's face. I made a decision. My father could choose to live in the comfortable lie my mother had built for them. But I couldn't. I had to know the truth no matter how ugly it was. I owed it to my grandmother. And I owed it to myself. My search for the truth started that night. My first move was to call my Aunt Carol. She had always been the softer of the two sisters, more prone to emotion and less concerned with maintaining the flawless family image. When my mother was steel, Carol was water. She had looked just as shocked as everyone else at the funeral, but there was something else in her eyes too, a flicker of something I couldn't name. It looked like fear. I waited until the next morning to call, giving her time to process. When she answered, her voice was strained. "Olivia, honey, how are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Aunt Carol," I lied. "I was just thinking about yesterday." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It was a difficult day," she said carefully. "That woman," I said, deciding to be direct. "The one who came at the end. Do you have any idea who she was?" I could hear her take a deep breath. "Your mother thinks she's a con artist. Someone who read the obituary and decided to try to get money from the family." It was the official story. The one my mother had no doubt dictated to her sister in a hushed, frantic phone call the night before. "Do you believe that?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. I don't know what to believe," Carol stammered. It was all so shocking. She was a terrible liar. Her hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. "Aunt Carol," I said, lowering my voice. "You're my aunt, and you loved Grandma. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need to understand." I saw Mom's face. She knew who that woman was. Or at least, she knew it was possible. I heard a sniffle on the other end. "Olivia, please don't do this," she whispered. "You'll just upset your mother more." "My mother is already upset," I countered. "This isn't about her. This is about Grandma. If she had another daughter, a whole other life we never knew about, I want to know. It feels wrong to just erase it, to pretend it didn't happen." I could hear the conflict in her silence. Her loyalty to her sister was warring with something else, something deeper. Our mother, Rose, she didn't have an easy life growing up, Carol said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Her parents were very strict, very religious. There were stories, things that were whispered about when she was a teenager. What kind of stories? I asked, my heart pounding. I don't know for sure, she said quickly, already retreating. Just rumors. Your mother would know more. You should talk to her. I tried, I said, the frustration creeping back into my voice. She won't say anything. Dad won't either. They just want me to forget about it. Aunt Carol sighed. It was a sound of deep, long-held sadness. Your mother, she likes things to be a certain way. Perfect. Anything that doesn't fit into that picture gets put away. That was the most honest thing anyone had said all day. Where would she put something like this away? I asked, thinking aloud. Carol was silent for a moment. I thought she might hang up, that I had pushed too far. But then she spoke, her voice so low I could barely hear her. Your grandmother kept everything. She never threw anything away. She had an old hope chest, a cedar one. It's in the attic of her house. She kept her most important things in there. Things from before she was married. It felt like a key. A tiny, fragile key to a door I wasn't supposed to open. Thank you, Aunt Carol, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. Be careful, Olivia, she warned. Some doors are left closed for a reason. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. My grandmother's house was empty now, sitting in silence, waiting to be sold. My mother had the keys, but I knew where a spare was hidden, under a loose brick by the back porch. Grandma Rose had shown it to me years ago, a secret just between us. It was time to use it. Driving to my grandmother's house felt like traveling back in time. The familiar streets, the old oak tree in her front yard, the slightly peeling paint on the porch swing. Everything was exactly as she had left it. I found the spare key right where she had said it would be and let myself in. The house smelled of her, a faint mix of lavender and cinnamon. It was a comforting smell, but today it was layered with a sense of unease. I was here as a trespasser in my own family's history. The attic was just as I remembered it. Dusty, cluttered, and filled with the ghosts of forgotten things. Sunlight streamed through a single grimy window, illuminating dancing dust motes. In the far corner, under a white sheet, was the cedar hope chest. It was beautiful, with intricate carvings on the lid. I lifted the sheet, the scent of cedar filling the small space. I tried the lid. It was locked. Of course it was locked. My heart sank. I jiggled the old brass lock, but it was solid. I felt a wave of despair. Had I come all this way for nothing? I sat down on a dusty old stool, trying to think. Where would Grandma Rose hide a key? She wasn't a complicated person, but she was sentimental. She would have kept it somewhere meaningful. My eyes scanned the attic. Old furniture, boxes of holiday decorations, stacks of books. The books. Grandma loved to read. She had stacks of them everywhere. She used to say books were her dearest friends. I walked over to a teetering pile of old hardcovers. I started pulling them out one by one, shaking them gently. Nothing. I was about to give up when I saw it. A small, worn copy of The Secret Garden. It had been her favorite, and mine when I was a little girl. I picked it up. The cover was soft with age. I fanned the pages, and a small, tarnished brass key fell out and landed softly on the dusty floor. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I picked it up, my fingers closing around the cool metal. It felt heavy with significance. With trembling hands, I walked back to the chest, inserted the key into the lock, and turned. There was a loud click that echoed in the silent attic. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside, the scent of cedar and old memories was even stronger. On top lay a neatly folded wedding veil, yellowed with age. Beneath it were stacks of old photographs, baby clothes, and a collection of dried flowers. It was a time capsule of a life I thought I knew. I carefully lifted the top layer of items, setting them aside. My hands were searching for something more, something hidden. My fingers brushed against a false bottom. It was a thin piece of wood, made to look like the base of the chest. I pried at the edge with my fingernails, and it lifted easily. Underneath was a small hollow space, and inside that space was a bundle of letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I lifted the letters out. They were written on thin, almost translucent paper. The ink was faded, the handwriting a delicate, looping script that I recognized instantly as my grandmother's. The letters were addressed to a man named Thomas. I had never heard of him. I sat down on the dusty floor of the attic, the bundle of letters in my lap. I untied the ribbon carefully. The first letter was dated over 60 years ago. My grandmother would have been just 17. "My dearest Thomas," it began. "I miss you more than words can say. This town feels so small and empty without you. My parents watch my every move. They still don't approve of you, but I don't care. My heart is yours, and it always will be." I read on, letter after letter. They told a story of a secret, passionate love between my grandmother, the daughter of a strict religious family, and a young man who was considered unsuitable. He was a laborer with no money and no prospects. They met in secret, planned a future together, and dreamed of running away. Then the tone of the letters changed. They became more frantic, more desperate. "Thomas, something has happened," she wrote. "I haven't been well. I think I'm with child. We have to do something. My father would kill me. He would literally kill me." The subsequent letters were filled with fear and panic. Thomas was trying to save money so they could leave town, but it wasn't fast enough. My grandmother wrote about hiding her changing body, about the constant terror of being discovered. And then I found the letter I had been searching for, the one that explained everything. "My love," it read. "It's a girl. She is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. She has your dark hair and my blue eyes. I have only been allowed to hold her for a moment. My parents have arranged everything. A good family, they say, will take her. They live far from here. I am not allowed to know their name or where they live. They are making me sign papers. They say it is for the best. They say it will erase my sin." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I felt a profound, gut-wrenching sadness for the young girl my grandmother had been, forced to give up her child in shame and secrecy. "They are letting me name her," the letter continued. "I have named her Clara." Clara. The name hit me like a physical blow. It was her. The woman at the funeral. This was not a coincidence or a scam. This was real. This was my grandmother's lost daughter, my mother's sister. "I will never forget her, Thomas," the letter concluded, "and I will never stop loving you. I will live the life my parents have planned for me. I will marry the man they have chosen, but my heart will always be with you and our little Clara." I sat there in the dusty silence of the attic, tears streaming down my face. I cried for the grandmother I never truly knew, for the pain she must have carried her entire life. And I cried for Clara, the baby who was given away. But underneath the sadness, a cold, hard anger began to form. My mother hadn't just been surprised at the funeral. If these letters existed, she must have known. Maybe she had found them years ago. Maybe Grandma Rose had even told her. Her denial wasn't born of ignorance. It was a deliberate, calculated lie. She had known about her sister and had chosen to erase her. I carefully retied the ribbon around the letters and placed them back in the chest. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, locked the chest, and hid the key back in the book. I walked out of that house with a new, heavy certainty. This was no longer just about uncovering a secret. It was about exposing a lie that had been poisoning my family for decades. And I knew my next confrontation with my mother would be very different. I wouldn't be asking questions anymore. I would be demanding answers. I waited 2 days before I went to my parents' house. I needed the time to let my anger settle into something more focused, more strategic. I couldn't go in hot-headed. My mother was a master at deflecting emotional outbursts. She would use my anger against me, paint me as hysterical and irrational. I had to be calm. I had to be methodical. I found her in the sunroom, reading a book, a cup of tea on the table beside her. She looked up when I entered, her expression neutral. Since the funeral, she had been acting as if nothing had happened. It was her signature move. When faced with a crisis, she would simply behave as if the crisis did not exist, forcing everyone around her to conform to her reality. "Olivia," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk," I said, my voice even. I sat in the armchair opposite her. She placed a bookmark in her book and closed it, setting it aside with deliberate slowness. "About what?" she asked, her tone already defensive. "About the woman at the funeral," I said. "About Clara." Her face tightened. "I thought we were done with this. Your father told me you were upset. It's understandable, but you are letting a complete stranger's fantasy get the better of you." "It's not a fantasy, Mom," I said, keeping my gaze steady. "I know who she is. She's Grandma Rose's daughter, your sister." A flicker of panic crossed her eyes before she extinguished it. "That is a ridiculous and hurtful accusation," she said, her voice like ice. "How dare you speak about your grandmother that way? She was a good and decent woman." "I know she was," I replied. "I also know she had a hard life. I know she fell in love with a man named Thomas, and I know she had a baby girl that her parents forced her to give away." The color drained from her face again, just as it had at the funeral. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. I had hit my target. She didn't ask how I knew. She didn't have to. Her silence was a confession. "You knew?" I said, the words coming out as a pained whisper. "You've always known, haven't you?" She finally found her voice, but it was brittle and sharp. "You have been snooping," she hissed. "Going through your grandmother's private things. That is a violation. You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know I've been lied to," I shot back, my composure starting to crack. "My whole life. You let me believe Grandma had this simple, perfect past. You let me believe our family was this neat, tidy little unit. But it was all a lie. You had a sister you buried." "I buried nothing," she snapped, her voice rising. "That situation was dealt with 60 years ago. It was my mother's shame, her mistake. She moved on. She built a good life, a respectable life. This woman showing up now is trying to destroy all of that." The word shame struck me. That's all this was to her. Not a lost sister, not a human being, but a shame. A stain on the family's reputation. "It wasn't a situation, Mom. It was a person," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pity. "Did Grandma ever talk to you about her?" "Of course not," she said dismissively. "It was the great secret, the thing we never ever spoke of. My father made that clear. We were to protect my mother's reputation." "So you just pretended she didn't exist?" I asked, incredulous. "It was for the best," she insisted, her jaw set stubbornly. Bringing it up would only have caused pain. It was in the past. It needed to stay there. I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. "Then why did you look so terrified at the funeral? If it was all in the past, why did the sight of her nearly make you faint?" She flinched. I was shocked, that's all. To see someone dredge up that old ugliness on the day of my mother's funeral? It was vile. She's after money, Olivia, can't you see that? That's all this is about. She was retreating back to the safety of her original lie. It was easier for her to believe Clara was a villain than to confront the truth of her own actions. I realized I wouldn't get any more from her today. She was a fortress, and I had only just breached the outer wall. I needed more than 60-year-old letters. I needed living proof. I needed to find Clara. I stood up. "I don't believe you," I said quietly, "and I'm not letting this go. If you pursue this, you will be hurting this family and dishonoring your grandmother's memory," she warned, her eyes cold and hard. "No," I said, turning to leave. The dishonor was in keeping the secret. As I walked out, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The perfect image of my mother had been irrevocably broken. I no longer saw a pillar of strength and dignity. I saw a frightened woman, desperately trying to keep a lifetime of secrets buried. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was going to be the one to dig them all up. Finding Clara felt like a monumental task. I had a name and a face, but nothing else. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but that felt too impersonal, too cold. This was my family. I needed to do this myself. My first logical step was the funeral home. She had spoken to the director. She had signed the guest book. They would have a record of her. I called them the next day, my heart pounding with a nervous energy. I put on my most pleasant, unassuming voice. "Hello," I said to the woman who answered. "My name is Olivia Martin. My grandmother Rose Martin had her service with you a few days ago." "Yes, of course, Miss Martin," the woman replied kindly. "It was a beautiful service. My condolences to you and your family." "Thank you," I said. "I'm calling because I was hoping you could help me." There were so many people there, and my mother is a bit overwhelmed. We're trying to send out thank you cards, and we think we might have missed someone in the guest book, a woman named Clara. I held my breath. "Clara," the woman repeated, and I could hear the rustling of papers. "Yes, I remember her. She arrived just at the end. Let me see. Yes, here she is. Clara Abbott. She left a local address." My heart leaped. "Oh, that's wonderful," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Could you possibly give me that address? I'd feel terrible if we didn't thank her for coming." There was a moment of hesitation. "Well, we don't normally give out personal information." "I completely understand," I said quickly. "It's just that my mother, Eleanor, is so particular about these things. She would be very upset if she knew I failed to get the information. She's having a very hard time, as you can imagine." I was using my mother's reputation for being controlling to my advantage. It was a tactic she would have been proud of. After another moment of thought, the woman relented. "All right, dear. Just this once." She read out an address in a quiet, modest neighborhood about 30 minutes away. I scribbled it down, my hand trembling. "Thank you," I said, flooded with relief. "Thank you so much." I spent the rest of the day agonizing over what to do next. Should I call? Should I write a letter? Or should I just show up? Showing up felt too aggressive, too confrontational. But a phone call felt too easy for her to dismiss. I needed her to see me, to see my grandmother's face in mine. I needed her to know I was not my mother. The next morning, I drove to the address. It was a small, neat house with a well-tended garden in the front yard. It was the kind of garden my grandmother would have loved, full of bright, cheerful flowers. I parked my car down the street and just sat there for a long time, trying to build up my courage. What would I say? How would I even begin? Finally, I got out of the car and walked up the short path to the front door. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. I could hear movement inside, and then the door opened. It was her, Clara. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked softer, less formidable than she had at the funeral. Her blue eyes, so much like my grandmother's, widened in surprise when she saw me. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a squeak. "My name is Olivia Martin. I'm Eleanor's daughter." Clara's expression shifted from surprise to a guarded watchfulness. She didn't smile. "I know who you are," she said. "What do you want?" Her tone wasn't hostile, just weary, like she was expecting a fight. "I'm not here to yell at you," I said quickly. "I'm not my mother, I just..." I want to understand. I want to talk. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for something. I tried to keep my expression open and honest. I wanted her to see that I was sincere. After what felt like an eternity, she seemed to come to a decision. She sighed and stepped back, holding the door open. "All right," she said. "Come in." Her house was cozy and lived in, filled with books and plants and colorful paintings. It felt warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to my parents' cold, minimalist home. We sat at a small wooden table in her kitchen, and she poured us both a cup of tea. For a few minutes, we sat in an awkward silence. I didn't know where to start. She seemed to sense my struggle. "You look like her," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on my face. "Your grandmother. You have her smile." Tears pricked my eyes. "You knew her," I whispered. "You actually knew her." Clara nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "Yes," she said. "I did." And then she told me everything. Her story came out not in a rush, but in a slow, thoughtful narrative, as if she had replayed it in her mind 1,000 times. She told me about her adoptive parents who were kind and loving and had told her from a young age that she was adopted. She told me about the deep, persistent need she always had to know where she came from. "It wasn't that I was unhappy," she explained. "I had a good life. But there was always a piece of me that felt missing. A question mark at the very beginning of my story. She had spent years searching. Decades, really. Before the internet, it was a slow, painstaking process of writing letters to agencies and searching through sealed records. She hit one dead end after another. But she never gave up. About 7 years ago, new laws had opened up adoption records in the state where she was born. She finally got a name, Rose Martin, and a town. "I found her," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wrote her a letter. I didn't know what to expect. I thought she might not write back. I was prepared for that, but she did. She called me." Clara paused, taking a sip of her tea. That first phone call, we were both crying so hard we could barely speak. She told me she had thought about me every single day of her life. She said giving me up was the great sorrow of her heart. They arranged to meet. Secretly at first. They would meet for lunch in a town halfway between their homes. They were both nervous, but the connection was instant. They spent hours talking, trying to cram a lifetime of missed moments into a few precious hours. "It was wonderful," Clara said, her eyes shining with the memory. "It was like finding that missing piece of myself. And for her, I think it was a kind of peace. A healing." Grandma Rose had told her all about her life, about her husband who had passed away years earlier, about my mother, Eleanor, and about me. She showed Clara pictures of me, from a baby up to my college graduation. "She was so proud of you," Clara said, looking at me with a genuine warmth that made my heart ache. "She loved you so much." "Then why was it a secret?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. "Why did we never know about you?" Clara's expression darkened. "Because of your mother," she said flatly. After a few months, Rose decided she couldn't keep the secret any longer. She wanted to tell Eleanor. She wanted us to meet. She hoped, that her daughter would be happy for her. She shook her head slowly. She was wrong. Eleanor's reaction was venomous. She accused Rose of trying to ruin the family. She accused me of being a gold digger. She said it was a disgusting, shameful secret that should have stayed buried. The words were so familiar, so perfectly my mother, that I felt a chill run down my spine. Eleanor gave her an ultimatum, Clara continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She told Rose that if she ever acknowledged me publicly or tried to make me a part of the family, Eleanor would cut her off completely. She said Rose would never see her, or you, ever again. The cruelty of it took my breath away. My mother had weaponized her own daughter, me, to keep her mother in line. She had forced her mother to choose between her two children, knowing it would break her heart. So Rose chose to keep seeing me in secret. Clara finished, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. She was terrified of losing you. So we continued to meet, but it was always shadowed by the secret. It hurt her so much. She just wanted her family to be whole. Clara stood up and went to a bookshelf in the living room. She came back with a small photo album and opened it on the table. The pages were filled with pictures of her and my grandmother. They were at parks, in restaurants, by a lake. In every picture, they were smiling, their arms around each other. They looked so happy, so alike. In one photo, Grandma Rose was holding a silver locket. "She gave me this," Clara said, touching the photo gently. It was her mother's. She said she wanted her firstborn to have it. The proof was undeniable. It was a truth that was so much deeper and more painful than I could have imagined. This wasn't just a lie of omission. This was a campaign of active, deliberate cruelty, orchestrated by my own mother. She had not only denied her sister's existence, but she had also blackmailed her own mother, forcing her to live a lie and causing her unimaginable pain in the last years of her life. I looked at the happy faces in the photographs, and my sadness hardened into a cold, clear resolve. My mother had not been protecting her family's reputation. She had been protecting her own fragile ego, her own selfish vision of a perfect life. She had silenced her mother and erased her sister. "She can't get away with this," I said, my voice low and determined. "She can't." Clara looked at me, her blue eyes searching mine. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure the truth comes out," I said. "All of it. She doesn't get to control the story anymore." The next few weeks were a quiet storm. I met with Clara several more times. Each meeting felt less like talking to a stranger and more like getting to know a part of my own history. She told me stories about Grandma Rose that I had never heard, stories from their secret meetings. She filled in the gaps of my grandmother's life, painting a picture of a woman who was not just the kind, simple matriarch I had known, but a woman of deep passion, resilience, and sorrow. Clara gave me copies of everything. The photos of her and Rose. A copy of her original birth certificate, which she had managed to unseal, listing Rose as her mother. And a copy of a short handwritten letter Rose had given her. A letter that simply said, "To my dearest Clara, my first daughter, finding you has been the greatest gift of my life. I love you, Mama." Each piece of evidence was a stone, and I was building a wall that my mother's denials would not be able to break through. I knew a simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. She would deny, deflect, and gaslight me. She would try to isolate me from the rest of the family. I needed a stage. I needed an audience. I needed to dismantle her carefully constructed world in a way she could not escape. The reading of the will was in 2 weeks. It was the perfect venue. My mother, my father, Aunt Carol, and her husband Ben would all be there. It would be an official proceeding, a place where facts and documents held more weight than emotional manipulation. I contacted my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a kind, elderly man who had known our family for years. I told him I had some personal documents of my grandmother's that I believed were relevant to her final wishes, and asked for a private meeting. He was hesitant, but I was persistent. I met him in his stuffy, book-lined office. I laid everything out on his large mahogany desk: the copies of the birth certificate, the photos, the heartfelt letter to Clara. I told him the entire story from the moment Clara walked into the funeral to the threats my mother had made. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his expression growing more grave with each piece of evidence I presented. He had known Rose for over 40 years. He had seen the steel in my mother, Eleanor. He did not seem surprised by her cruelty, only saddened. "Your grandmother," he said slowly, looking at the photos of Rose and Clara. "She changed in the last few years. She seemed lighter, happier. I asked her about it once, and she just smiled and said she had found something she thought she had lost forever. I never knew what she meant. Until now. He looked at me over the top of his spectacles. What is it you want me to do, Olivia? Her will, I said. Is there any way to formally acknowledge Clara? To make this right? He sighed and pulled out a thick file. Rose's will is very straightforward. Everything is to be divided equally between her two daughters, Eleanor and Carol. He paused, looking at me. She wrote this will 10 years ago, before she reconnected with Clara. My heart sank. So there's nothing we can do? Mr. Henderson was silent for a moment, tapping his pen on the desk. Rose was a meticulous woman, he said. About a year ago, she came to see me. She wanted to add a codicil, an addendum to her will. She didn't want to change the distribution of her assets, she said. She just wanted to add a letter to be read aloud to the family after her passing. She said it was important that her final words be heard. He opened the file and pulled out a sealed envelope. On the front, in my grandmother's familiar handwriting, were the words, "To be opened and read at the settling of my estate." I have no idea what it says, Mr. Henderson said, holding the envelope. But she was very insistent. She made me promise I would read it, no matter what. A shiver went down my spine. My grandmother had known. She had known my mother would try to deny the truth, to bury Clara forever. This letter was her last chance to speak. This was her testimony from beyond the grave. Then you have to read it, I said, my voice filled with a new sense of purpose. You have to. I will, he assured me. It was her final wish. I am legally bound to honor it. I then told him about my plan. I wanted Clara to be there. I wanted her to be present to hear her mother's final words. Mr. Henderson was hesitant at first, worried about the conflict it would cause. But I was firm. This isn't about causing conflict, I explained. It's about fulfilling my grandmother's true wish. She wanted her family to be whole. My mother is the one who prevented that. Clara has a right to be there. She is her daughter. He finally agreed. He would inform my mother that a guest of the deceased, named on a list provided by Rose, would also be in attendance. He wouldn't say who. Let my mother wonder. Let her worry. I left the lawyer's office feeling a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. The stage was set. The players were all about to take their places, and my grandmother, in her quiet, steadfast way, was about to have the final word. The truth was coming, and I knew it was going to tear our family apart so that it could finally, maybe, be put back together honestly. The day of the will reading was gray and overcast, matching the mood in my heart. I drove to Mr. Henderson's office alone. I had arranged to meet Clara there so we could walk in together. When I saw her waiting in the lobby, she gave me a small, nervous smile. I took her hand, and it was cold. Are you ready for this? I asked her. She took a deep breath. I'm not here for a fight, she said. I'm just here to hear my mother's words. We walked into the conference room together. My parents and my aunt and uncle were already seated around the large, polished table. The moment my mother saw Clara, her face turned to stone. The polite mask she wore for public appearances dropped, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. She shot a venomous glare at me. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the floor. My father looked utterly bewildered, his eyes darting from me to Clara to his wife. Aunt Carol, however, just looked down at her hands, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. She knew. She had known all along, and her silence had been a form of complicity. What is she doing here? My mother demanded, her voice a low, dangerous hiss directed at Mr. Henderson. Clara Abbott is here at the express written request of the deceased, the lawyer said calmly, not batting an eye. He gestured for us to sit. We took the 2 empty chairs directly opposite my mother. The tension in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began to read the will. It was, as he had said, straightforward. The house was to be sold, and the proceeds divided between Eleanor and Carol. Various personal items were bequeathed to different family members. My mother's expression began to relax slightly as the familiar, expected words were read. She probably thought she had won. She thought the presence of Clara was a bluff, a final, empty gesture from a confused old woman. When he finished reading the main body of the will, Mr. Henderson paused. He picked up the sealed envelope. "There is one final item," he announced, "a codicil in the form of a letter which your mother instructed me to read aloud to you all." My mother's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward slightly, her body tensing. Mr. Henderson broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and began to read. The words in my grandmother's voice filled the silent room. "To my family," he read, "if you are hearing this, it means I am gone. I hope you will remember me with love as I have loved all of you. But there is a truth I must speak now, without fear and without interruption. A truth I was not strong enough to speak in life." He paused, and the room was utterly still. 61 years ago, I gave birth to a daughter. My first daughter. Her name is Clara. I was young and scared, and my parents forced me to give her away. They told me it was a secret I must carry to my grave, ashamed to be buried forever. For most of my life, I honored their wishes. I buried my heart with my lost child. My mother was staring at the letter in the lawyer's hands as if it were a snake. Her breathing was shallow. But a grave is no place for a living soul. Mr. Henderson continued reading. 7 years ago, a miracle happened. My Clara found me. The past several years, getting to know my firstborn, have been the happiest of my life. She is everything I could have hoped for. Kind, strong, and full of grace. She healed a part of me I thought was dead forever. I glanced at Clara. Tears were streaming silently down her face. I wanted to share this joy with my whole family. The letter went on. I wanted my 2 daughters to know each other. I wanted my granddaughter to know her aunt. I wanted us to be whole. But I was met with cruelty and fear. The lawyer's voice was steady, but the words were a hammer blow. My daughter Eleanor refused to accept her sister. She called her ugly names. She called my joy a shame. She threatened to cut me out of her life and out of my granddaughter Olivia's life, if I ever acknowledged Clara. She used my love for my family as a weapon to force me back into silence. The pain of that ultimatum was a prison I lived in until my last day. My father turned and stared at my mother, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He was finally hearing the truth. Not from me, but from the woman he had loved and respected for decades. This was not my mother's fault, Eleanor choked out, finding her voice. She was confused. This woman manipulated her. She was a sick old woman. "Let him finish," my father said, his voice cold and hard, a tone I had never heard him use with her before. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice unwavering. "Therefore, I am making a change to my final wishes. The shame was never mine, and it is not Clara's. The shame belongs to those who value appearances over love. I am amending my will to reflect the truth of my heart. I direct that 1/2 of the share of my estate previously designated for my daughter, Eleanor, be given instead to my daughter, Clara Abbott. May she use it to live a life full of the joy her mother was too cowardly to fight for." A collective gasp went through the room. My mother looked like she had been physically struck. She had lost a huge portion of her inheritance, but it was more than the money. It was the public declaration, the final, undeniable judgment from her own mother. But Grandma Rose wasn't done. "One last thing," Mr. Henderson read. "The silver locket that belonged to my mother. I know Eleanor has always wanted it, but I leave it to Clara. A mother's love should be passed to her children. All of her children." The letter ended there. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother finally broke it. She leaped to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a fraud," she shrieked, her face contorted with rage. "She tricked her. She poisoned my mother against me. I will contest this. I will not let this thief steal what is mine." She turned her fury on Clara. "You did this. You wormed your way into her life and you stole from her. Before I could stop myself, I stood up too. No, Mom, I said, my voice shaking but clear. She did nothing. You did this. You did this when you threatened an old woman. You did this when you forced her to hide her own child. I found the letters, Mom. The letters she wrote to Thomas 60 years ago. I know everything. My mother stared at me, her rage momentarily replaced by shock. Then Aunt Carol, who had been silent and weeping this whole time, finally spoke. She's right, Eleanor. Carol sobbed, looking at her sister for the first time. She's right. Mom told me about Clara 2 years ago. She made me promise not to tell you she had told me. She was so happy but so scared of you. You broke her heart, Eleanor. You broke all of our hearts. That was the final blow. Her own sister, her lifelong ally, had just confirmed the betrayal. My father was looking at her with an expression of utter disgust. She looked around the room from face to face and saw no support. No allies. Her entire world, the one she had controlled with fear and intimidation for so long, had crumbled to dust at her feet. She sank back into her chair, all the fight gone out of her. She looked small and old and utterly defeated. She had lost the money. She had lost the locket. But more than that, she had lost the one thing she valued above all else. Her perfect image. The lie was dead, and she had nothing left. In the days that followed the will reading, a quiet, seismic shift occurred in my family. It wasn't loud or explosive anymore. The bomb had already gone off in the lawyer's office. This was the fallout. The slow settling of radioactive dust. My father was the first to talk to me. He called me the next day and asked me to meet him for coffee. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he seemed to have shrunk inside his clothes. We sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe. He didn't speak for a long time, just stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. I didn't know, Olivia, he said finally, his voice raspy. I swear to you, I had no idea it was like that. I know, Dad, I said gently. I believed him. My father's weakness was not malice, it was his blind loyalty to my mother. He had enabled her for decades, smoothing over her sharp edges, making excuses for her controlling behavior, always choosing to believe her version of events because it was easier. She told me it was just a rumor, he continued, his voice full of self-recrimination. A baseless story from their childhood town. When that woman, Clara, showed up, Eleanor told me she was a grifter. I believed her. It was easier to believe that than to believe my wife was a liar. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. I defended her to you. I told you to drop it. I am so sorry. You were just trying to protect her, I said, and to protect the family. But what was I protecting? He asked, his voice cracking. A lie? A cruel, horrible lie? I've been married to that woman for 35 years, and in that office, listening to Rose's letter, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. He shook his head slowly. I don't know what to do now. I don't know who I'm living with. Their marriage was broken. Maybe it had been broken for a long time, and this was just the event that had finally made the cracks visible. I didn't have any answers for him. I just listened. And for the first time, I felt like I was talking to my father not as my mother's husband, but as his own person. My conversation with Aunt Carol was different. She called me, sobbing, and apologized profusely. I was a coward, Olivia, she wept. I always have been. Eleanor has always been the strong one, the one in charge. I was so scared of her, of what she would do if I crossed her. We met for lunch, and she told me how my grandmother had confided in her about Clara. She was so full of joy, but so torn, Carol said, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. She made me swear not to tell Eleanor that I knew. She said, let me have this one person in my family who I can talk to about my whole life. And I kept that promise. But I should have done more. I should have stood up to Eleanor years ago. I felt a surge of compassion for her. She had been living under my mother's thumb her whole life. In a way, the truth had set her free too. We talked for hours about our family, about my grandmother. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. Our relationship was healing, reforged in the truth. And then there was Clara, my new aunt. We started spending time together, tentatively at first, and then with a growing sense of comfort and familiarity. We had coffee, we went for walks, we talked about everything and nothing. She was warm and funny and kind. She had my grandmother's laugh. She told me she had no intention of keeping the money my mother had lost. She was going to use a portion of it to set up a scholarship fund at the local community college in my grandmother's name, and the rest she was donating to a charity that helped reunite adopted children with their birth parents. "I never wanted the money, Olivia," she told me one afternoon as we sat on a park bench. "I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted my mother's truth to be heard. The money? It was just her way of making sure Eleanor had to listen." Getting to know her was like discovering a hidden room in a house I thought I knew completely. It was a gift. The best gift my grandmother could have possibly left me. Finally, I knew I had to see my mother. I went to the house a week after the will reading. My father let me in. He said she was in her room and hadn't come out much. He looked lost in his own home. I knocked on her bedroom door. "Mom?" "Go away," came the muffled reply. I opened the door anyway. She was sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at the garden. She looked small and defeated. The powerful, intimidating woman I had known my whole life was gone, replaced by this deflated shell. She didn't look at me. "Have you come to gloat?" she asked, her voice flat and empty of emotion. "No," I said quietly. "I came to see how you are." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "How do you think I am? My family has turned against me. My own mother posthumously humiliated me. My daughter orchestrated the entire thing. So, yes, Olivia, I'm just wonderful." She was still trying to cast herself as the victim. Even now, she couldn't see what she had done. "Grandma didn't humiliate you, Mom?" I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "She just told the truth. You're the one who built a life based on a lie." She finally turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, self-pitying anger. "I did what I had to do to protect this family, to protect our name. I gave you a good life, a perfect life, free from shame and scandal. And this is how you repay me? By digging up the past and siding with a stranger?" "She's not a stranger, Mom. She's your sister," I said. "And protecting a name is not more important than protecting a person. You hurt Grandma. You hurt Clara. And you lied to me. That's not protection. That's control." I could see in her eyes that she would never get it. She was too entrenched in her own narrative, too committed to the idea that she had always been right. She would never apologize. She would never change. I took a deep breath. It was time to set my final boundary. "I am going to have a relationship with Clara," I said, my voice clear and steady. "She's my aunt. She is part of my family now. You can either accept that and be a part of that family, or you can choose to stay here, alone with your secrets. It's your choice." She just stared at me, her face a cold, hard mask. She didn't say a word. I knew what her choice was. I turned and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. I knew it was the last time I would ever be in that house, in that life, in the same way again. Months have passed. Life has found a new normal. My father moved out. He and my mother are separated. He's living in a small apartment, trying to figure out who he is without her. He and I have dinner once a week. He's quieter now, more thoughtful. He's learning to be his own person. Aunt Carol and I are closer than ever. She's blossoming now that she's out from under my mother's shadow. My mother remains in her house, a queen in a kingdom of one. She refuses to speak to me or to Carol or to my father. She did not contest the will. Her lawyers told her she had no case. She is isolated, living inside the crumbling fortress of her own pride. She got what she always wanted, a life free of the people who dared to challenge her perfect world. It just turns out that was everyone. And me? I'm happy. I have a new family. Clara and I talk almost every day. Last weekend, she gave me the silver locket. "Your grandmother would have wanted you to have this," she said, her eyes shining. As I held it in my hand, I felt a profound connection to the grandmother I thought I knew, and the one I was just now getting to meet through the stories of her two daughters. My mother had built her world on a perfect image. When it cracked, she was the only one who fell through. The rest of us, we were finally free. We were messy and complicated and imperfect. And for the first time, we were whole.